one tree can be a garden. That's also what I want to get out of here. Sometimes it could be multiple, but it could also just be one. So that tree supports all kinds of other different plants and animals. So
think about what it takes to run a farm. It takes people digging in and resources to support that. So we've had thousands of people come to the farm to steward the site, to make friends.
Hey listeners, Dan Bagley here, your host for the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. And I'm thrilled you're here today because we're talking about some unique green spaces in your city of Oaks. And to help me with this, I have the amazing producer, Dr. Sarah Glova. Sarah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so great. How could I not be? Look at this beautiful space that we're in.
It is awesome.
Yeah.
It's green, it's lush. The sun isn't out yet, or at least not burning
There's a
us.
bit of the countdown for the sun. Recording a podcast in North Carolina outside is always a bit risky, but it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
And you might be wondering why it's so beautiful and green and luscious and why we're shooting out here. It's because we're at the Raleigh Greenhouse, which is a beautiful nursery. And I don't know if you knew this, but really cool fact, if you've ever been in some of the Raleigh parks, if you've noticed, most of that foliage, flowers, plants probably came from the greenhouse. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, 35,000 to 40,000 species are produced every year in the Raleigh greenhouses and nurseries, which is just a crazy number.
And I'm embarrassed to admit that as long as I've lived here, I didn't know we had a greenhouse. But it makes so much sense. If you've been in a park, you see how beautiful the flowers are and everything, and this is where it all comes from. I love it.
You're right. And it's really not even that big, but I mean, they get a big punch of greenery from this small amount of space, which must talk to sustainability, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. In this episode, we'll dive into the inspiring world of urban gardening in Raleigh, exploring how these gardens are helping to build a more sustainable future while bringing people together in new and exciting ways.
And that's a cool term, that urban garden. And we're going to talk about what that means. What is an urban garden? What's an urban green space? So we'll get into that a little bit with our guests.
Yeah, that'd be great. And joining us on this incredible journey are two special guests who are passionate about urban greenery and sustainability. Lisa Grele Barrie, Executive Director of the Raleigh City Farm. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
And Zach Manor, Urban Forester for the City of Raleigh. Zach, welcome.
thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, to break the ice, we like to do something a little fun. We like to play a game called Two Facts and a False. Now, the good news, you guys will be playing together. You're on a team. The bad news is you'll be playing against the director of Brown Thumbs Anonymous, Dr. Sarah Glova. Are you ready to play this game? I'm going to give you 3 facts. 2 will be true, 1 will be false. You have to guess the false.
Can we confer?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. So here we go. Starting with A. Urban gardens can significantly reduce the urban heat island effect, helping to cool cities during hot summer months. B. Bees are one of the most important pollinators for urban gardens, with 1/3 of the food we eat relying on pollination by bees. Or C. Urban gardening increases water consumption compared to traditional agriculture because city soils require more frequent watering. So what is the false statement?
I'll let y'all go first.
So I know A is definitely true. The green space does help reduce heat island effect.
Right, and I would
versus
say,
pavement.
too, that bees and other pollinators are responsible for 1 of every 3 bites of food we eat. So to me, that is a truth. So that leaves us with the final
Addition
choice,
by
which is-
subtraction.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd go with C.
Yep.
Okay, how about our brown thumb?
I feel like I am on a losing team listening to them think through that conversation. I feel like I've heard the myth. Maybe it's not a myth. Maybe it is a myth. I've heard this idea that my garden in my backyard takes more water than a traditional farm. So maybe that is true. I like what Lisa said about the pollinators. It's not just bees. So maybe your B is false because you're only including bees. So I'll pick B.
I like where you're going with that. However, our experts are correct. It is
I'm
C.
not surprised.
Urban gardening can actually reduce water consumption compared to traditional agriculture because it often employs more efficient watering techniques such as drip irrigation, rainwater harvesting, and additionally, urban gardens typically use less land and can incorporate practices like mulching to retain soil moisture. So congratulations,
Good
you have
job.
done it. Well done.
What do we win?
We can keep our jobs.
That's exactly it. Thank
Is
you,
there a
Zach.
prize?
The prize is
This wonderful produce basket from
Yeah.
Raleigh,
I brought.
Raleigh City Farm that you
I'll
brought,
take my
Lisa.
own veg back. All right.
and it is beautiful.
Thank you.
So what we'd really like to do now is get to know you guys a little bit better and what it is that you do. And if you don't mind, if you can explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old kid, that'd be really helpful because it's pretty much true. So why don't we start with you first, Zach? Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
All right. Well, if we're talking about 5-year-olds, you could equate what I do with the Lorax, right? So I speak for the trees.
I love it.
So I'm the urban forester for the city of Raleigh. We're in the parks department. And so we oversee city trees. So thinking about trees on streets, trees in parks, trees along greenways. We are everything. We do everything from the acorn to the stump grinder. So we plant, we prune, we remove, we talk about them, we remove plants. So if it's a tree and it's a city tree, it probably involves what we do.
From
Love
the
it.
acorn to the stump
To the
grinder.
stump
It's like
grinder.
someone's asked him this question before.
I know. And I got to say, Lorax, one of my
Crucial
favorite movies.
reference, yeah.
Let it grow. Lisa, how about you?
Right. So I'm the executive director of Raleigh City Farm, and we're a little 1.3 acre site in the middle of downtown Raleigh at the corner of Franklin and Blunt. As the executive director, I run the nonprofit, which means I am overseeing plants, people, and profit and money to ensure that we grow the fertilizer that makes it possible for our farm to grow.
Oh.
So overseeing all
pretty cool.
operations and loving it.
That's great. Plants, people, and profit. I like that. The alliteration is perfect as
The
well.
master of the alliteration.
And
Right.
the comparison of the money to the fertilizer that keeps the Raleigh City Farm nonprofit going, amazing. Just top
Yeah,
notch
that is top
wordplay.
notch.
No money, no
here
mission.
on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast this
You
morning.
guys are definitely too smart for me to be with you today. So if you guys don't mind, I'd like to shift the conversation just a little bit into this idea of big ideas. And could you share a little bit about what your big idea as it relates to urban gardens that maybe you're really excited about right now?
Sure, I can take that one first.
Sure.
So one of our goals as a city organization is having these green spaces equally distributed throughout the city. The benefits that we'll talk about that it provides, it's really important that you can experience it in your own community. So it doesn't really, hopefully it doesn't matter where you live, you still have the access to these urban green spaces. And so one of the things that our group is doing in urban forestry is trying to make sure our street trees are equally distributed. So thinking about whether you're in Northeast Raleigh, Southeast Raleigh, or downtown, the ability for there to be a street tree helps shade your driveway, your street, provides wildlife habitat. So we're really looking to expand and enhance our urban canopy. So that's our big
really cool.
idea is find a way to improve the number of street trees. So one tree can be a garden. That's also what I want to get out of here. Sometimes it could be multiple, but it could also just be one. So that tree supports all kinds of other different plants
That's a
and
good point.
animals. So
One tree can be a garden is maybe one of my new favorite phrases. Because as you mentioned, I'm a proud
like that.
member of the Brown
Brown
Thumb
Clubs.
Society.
Yeah, that's it.
I would love, I'm addicted to trying with gardening, but I'm not great. And so the idea that it's not necessarily a big garden that's making a difference. Sometimes it is just the one tree. And I love the idea of the equal distribution. I'm curious what that process has looked
Yeah,
like.
that's exactly what I was thinking too, Sarah. So how do you equally distribute, trees and other urban forestry foliage throughout the city?
Wordplay.
yeah. Well, so it's a combination, right? So you need some long-term and short-term vision there, right? So as development and as we grow, you have to be sort of deliberate in preserving what's possible. In those cases where preservation isn't possible, you have to plant. So I think there's a saying that goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
The next best time is today. So starting over sometimes is you could end up in a better situation than leaving. So what we do is we look to see how those trees are distributed. Then we sort of mapped it out. We also look at equity, vulnerability, stormwater benefit, heat islands. So we take a lot of big concepts, overlay them together on a map, and that helps us prioritize those areas. So where we start is where we want to be able to make the biggest difference. Right, by adding one tree will make a significant difference, maybe bigger in one neighborhood versus another. So we're looking for those empty gaps and holes, and that's how we're
Having
working
all
towards.
those layers of the map. That's really intricate. It's nice to hear about all the intentionality that goes into where these trees go.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's sort of not just something that we do in parks. You take information from every group in the city.
So I love what you're saying. I'd love to come back at some point to the discussion about equity and that vulnerability. But before we do that, Lisa, I got to hear from you. What's your big idea that you've got going on right now?
Right. Well, thinking about sound bites, I would say green is not just good, it's great. And more green is better.
I love it.
So, yes, green is so important. And at Raleigh City Farm, we also have a vision to create more green space, right? Not just green space for beauty, but green space for food. And so food insecurity and access is one of our core goals. And we can talk about that and dig into it later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just as we talked about a moment ago, expanding trees is a great big idea, but expanding more urban farms is also a really important idea. And we are in the process of expansion. So our phase 1 of our expansion actually happened on our site where we pulled in 2 adjacent parcels. So our site
great.
is bigger currently on our current site. And we're looking to start another Raleigh City Farm to be Raleigh City Farms.
Really?
Yes.
Wow,
That's big.
congratulations.
That's amazing.
That's big.
When is that going to, when are you thinking about making that happen?
Well, as I said before, we need fertilizer to grow. So much of this is contingent on resources and strategy. So we're in the process of
great.
pulling that together.
Well, I love it. And so I have to ask, I remember you saying it was 1.3 acres. What was it originally?
So it was. So the City of Raleigh actually was instrumental in helping start Raleigh City Farm in 2011.
Okay.
And it was a great partnership between Triangle Land Conservancy, our landlord, John Holmes of JT Hobby and Sons. We are leasing the land. We do not own it.
Okay.
So we had a partner, a nonprofit partner, a landlord, and the city to rezone 7 parcels that were formerly, they were a farm at one point in time, but they were apartment buildings and they were vacant.
Okay.
And our original mission was to transform a forgotten urban space into a productive farm. So that was how the farm was born in 2011
Wow.
with the help of the city and those 7 parcels.
What a cool example of partnership. Wow.
Right. No, that's really amazing. And it's just been thriving ever since. I know I've been out there before and I've helped out. It's just a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, I believe you were even there and told me what I should be doing. And I mean, I learned a great deal on 1.3 acres of land.
Right. And let's be clear. Progress is not an upward trajectory. We have had ebbs and flows in our history, for sure. And now we're hoping to sustain our farm until 2029, when our lease finally expires. So we have a constraint, as all green spaces do that don't own land, right?
Sure.
When we're renting. So the good news is we are on a really great upward trajectory with all of our metrics and all of our outcomes.
That's great.
And we're excited to leverage those and grow and
great.
expand.
It's that short and long term that Zach was talking about earlier.
Yeah, you're right.
We're seeing that at play here with Raleigh City Farm, too. I wonder if there's something there with anytime we're talking about green spaces, having that eye on both tomorrow and, 10 years from now.
Yeah. Sustainability.
Sustainability. I think we're going to talk more about that in a second. But there is a language piece that I wanted to confirm, not a community farm. There's a difference between a community garden and an urban garden. And
Oh, good point.
Can you all help us with that language a little bit just so we're using the
Sure.
right terms?
So most people are familiar with community gardens. And let's think about a checkerboard. And everybody gets a piece of the checkerboard. They all come together as a loosely organized organization, right, to steward that site. And if you think about community gardens are often associated with churches or schools, and the community comes together and they all individually claim their turf, right?
Okay.
We're an urban farm, a nonprofit urban farm, which means we are run like a nonprofit, meaning we have a board overseeing the staff, which is myself and a few other folks. And we are basically stewarding the site with a very formal, tried and true process and pulling in volunteers to advance our education and engagement goals.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
That's very helpful.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So I'd like to steer the conversation a little bit and ask you, Lisa, if you could tell us about the impact that you feel Raleigh City Farm has had on the community around you.
Right. We became a nonprofit in 2011 when our articles of incorporation were formed. However, the first shovel went into the ground in 2012. I believe
Okay.
it was with a volleyball team from NC State.
Ah,
So,
Love
so
that.
we've been growing since 2012. So think about what it takes to run a farm. It takes people digging in and resources to support that. So we've had thousands of people come to the farm
Right.
to steward the site, to make friends, to learn about plants, to learn about what it looks to see a broccoli growing in real time. Children. So the impact of simply being, I would say, a billboard for urban farming in the middle of this densely packed, not in 2011,
Right.
urban environment is a delightful surprise for people to suddenly come upon a farm and say, wow, this is a farm. We thought they
Right.
only existed out in the rural areas.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is a farm, and it's a beautiful little space of land. I mean, it's amazing how it seems like every year it's transformed and upgraded, and just it's amazing. But I wanted to ask, so you mentioned, like, for instance, the volleyball team came out. Who are some of the other folks that come out to work the farm?
So I love to make analogies between people and plants because we're so closely related. And if we have a diverse collection of plants on our site, which is so important for the health and well-being of our site, we have an immense diversity of people.
Yeah, it's great.
We have little people, we have old people, we have groups from abroad, we have gardening clubs, we have folks who need to do community service. I mean,
sure.
there are an infinite number of sizes, shapes, colors, and
That's great.
rainbow of people who dig in.
And I suppose the farm needs the people just as much as the people need the farm.
Oh, it's an absolutely symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, thank you for that. Zach, next question's for you.
Sure.
What are some of the biggest challenges you face in maintaining and expanding urban green spaces in Raleigh?
Sure. So to start, what I would say is an urban green space could be a lot of stuff.
Sure.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I live in an apartment, I can't have an urban green space, I would say that's wrong, right? If you have a balcony, if you have a plant in your window, on your balcony in general, right? So it still
good
can
point.
provide shade, provides, makes oxygen, CO2, can provide food, fruit, whatever you need. So don't think about an urban garden as being something you can attain. There are lots of opportunities, and much like with diversity, they come in all shapes and sizes. I'd say one thing that we do is we think about, it's important to think about these as living infrastructure, right? So if you think about something a city normally does, a sidewalk, a water line, a trash pickup, well, parks, green spaces, urban gardens act as a living infrastructure.
Okay.
So they filter stormwater, they provide shade, they provide food, they provide a connection to nature. So thinking about these urban green spaces in a different context is important.
I haven't heard this term before, and it's probably more common in the work that y'all do, but living infrastructure. That makes so much sense. So infrastructure, the roads, the plumbing, but this is living infrastructure.
We used to call it green infrastructure, but that was sort of co-opted by stormwater folks, right? So when you talk about green infrastructure now, it's typically stormwater devices and works, and they're both, right? It is green and living. So we thought living was a better way to sort of approach that, and
nice.
and resonates a bit, I think. So
Sure.
challenges are, there's a lot of growth. So when I talked earlier about what we can do now and what we can do in the future, identifying those areas ahead of time to retain.
Sure.
And whether that's as a park, as a wildlife sanctuary, as a land conservancy, as a garden, that's a place where there likely won't be pavement or a building. And we need all of those things, but being able to preserve those areas in perpetuity provides that connection. So the challenge is often land is very expensive, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we need affordable housing, and we need lots of infrastructure. So being able to find that balance is always pretty difficult. But it's something we're working on and tackling and going through the process because all of these things are really important.
So it's not just pretty. It actually serves multiple purposes.
In some cases, it isn't pretty, but still serves a great purpose, right? So beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Well,
so
tell me about that.
Well, so everybody kind of has, you may like a different tree. I don't know what you two have a favorite tree, right? But
City of Oaks, come on.
Well, there you go. That's a good one. But much like teenagers, sometimes plants in their early stages end up a little awkward and gangly, right? So sometimes those early days of a plant aren't representative of what it will become. So thinking about planting something, it may look like a little stick or be sort of awkward, giving it time to grow into its surroundings. Sometimes you could end up with something beautiful. So I think the ugly duckling to the swan kind of scenario. So
are all green thumbs as good with like metaphors and wordplay? Because
Plant patience,
Is
right?
this
I think you just got a good group, I guess. I don't know. I mean,
I love the comparison of the teenager. And also I think this idea that there might be function even if there isn't that aesthetic, even if there isn't that, oh, this is a beautiful garden.
Right.
There might be some function there. I'm going to change the way I think about when I look at parks and even just green spaces
Right.
to this idea of the living infrastructure. Maybe it's serving a purpose related to stormwater or the heat island effect. So when we're talking about how hot an area gets, if there isn't that green space, there could be some infrastructure at play there. And considering, as you mentioned, growth and affordable housing is such a priority, having that frame of mind as that it's a living infrastructure helps us to make the argument for why this is so important, even with those other problems that we're balancing.
And with that, we need to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Welcome back to the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. I am here with Zach Manor, urban forester for City of Raleigh, and Lisa Grele Barrie, the executive director of the Raleigh City Farms. Zach, we want to start with you real quick. We talked a little bit about collaborations with Lisa, but what are the types of collaborations the city has? You know, who do you work with?
sure. So in a formal setting, we have lots of volunteer opportunities in the Parks Department and citywide, actually.
Okay.
So our Parks volunteer group, you could do everything from picking up litter, you can plant trees, you can mulch. We have activities going on all the time. So whether you're an individual or a corporate group or a neighborhood, there's lots of opportunities and options for you to do what you want to do. So that's my first recommendation is check out RaleighNC.gov Parks Volunteer, and they'll have a list of opportunities, ways to sign up, lots of information.
And haven't I seen that families can do that if the kiddos are with the parents?
Absolutely. It depends on the
Okay, that's
specific
good.
event.
Yeah.
There are some requirements depending on what it is exactly you're
Good to know.
doing. Things around highways, things like that. Sometimes there's an age requirement, but overall it depends on the option. And from young to old, we have some kind of opportunity that you can volunteer.
And Lisa, I imagine that's the same for you. Is it from young to old? Can kids come out and work at the city farm as well?
Sure, as long as they're supervised. And we do have 15 is the threshold for needing parental supervision.
Oh,
Beyond
okay.
that, teenagers can come out and engage in our formal volunteer opportunities that are cited on our website.
Okay, great. Lisa, how do you see urban green spaces playing a role in the future development of Raleigh?
Right, so it's critical, it's vital, it's urgent,
Yeah.
right? So let's think about hurricane season and the amount of rainfall that comes our way, which we need, of course, right, to fill up all of our reservoirs. However, if we have more impermeable surfaces, that water is storm water that's going to make a mess. And it's not good for the city. So the more green spaces we have, the more this water, this runoff will be saturating the ground, holding it, and hydrating the plants. If you look at Europe, there's a de-paving effort underway. They're literally pulling up pavement.
You said
and
de-paving?
De-paving.
That's another
yeah.
new term for me.
So
Okay.
Google it. Yeah, they're de-paving lots of parts of Europe, which of course have experienced traumatic flooding over the last several 10
you're right.
years and such. So yeah, green space, as Zach said before, for all the reasons that we love it, for beauty, for function, for community building, for food, for clean air and great soil. It's a smart choice, and City of Raleigh certainly has so many initiatives around that. So I applaud the City of Raleigh for taking that on.
Way to go, Zach.
You're welcome.
Single-handedly. And we should also applaud Lisa. If you're watching on the video,
YouTube,
you're getting a chance to see some of the bounty that Lisa brought. And we've had lots of
gorgeous.
wonderful insects. We've had some bees and some flies and some even butterflies kind of coming to try and check it out. So I just wanted to invite you to show us a little bit of what can come from a city farm here.
Right. So it's summer season, right? So we certainly have a bumper crop of melon. So we got a little watermelon here, a little Tigger melon, which is an heirloom
I love it.
melon. Over there, we have our spotted leopard melon, which is a type of honeydew. It's got a light green, beautiful flesh, very refreshing. Actually, if you eat melon, it is more hydrating than drinking a glass of water.
What?
Really?
Yes.
Why?
That is a question you need to dig into a little deeper. It will take me too much time to explain.
In a future episode, we'll
Right, but the nutrients the hydrating nutrients in
makes sense.
vegetables are more hydrating than water.
Wow.
They hold
Instead of drinking water, drink, like to say Gatorade. So it's kind
come
of
to
the
the farm
equivalent.
and buy some melons.
Yeah.
We've got beautiful squashes, we've got beautiful tomatoes, we've got okra, we've got eggplant here. We've got peppers.
Well, I
and
know
again,
what we're
brought
doing
beautiful
after
flowers.
this episode.
Yeah.
I guess we're
So-
heading over to the city farm.
Right? Look
Zach,
at
you gonna
all
come
these
with me?
colors.
We got fruit salad right in front of us.
That's a good point.
And a good veggies. We're going to have some roasted veggies for dinner. And then these
Sure.
beautiful flowers that you brought as well that are sitting at
Yeah,
the
they're
end of the
gorgeous.
table.
So remember, every Wednesday from 4 to 7 throughout the season, April to November, is our Pay What You Can farm stand.
Oh, wonderful.
So we're harvesting in the morning and we're selling in the evening. However, the most important thing we do, I believe, However, beyond our farm stand, all year round, we operate our farm share program, which means that we basically donate all the produce to nonprofits who are addressing
that's
food
wonderful.
insecurity and access. So our goal is to ensure that 95% of what we grow is made affordable and accessible to the community.
How much do you think you grow in a year?
So I know that last year we grew 13,439 pounds of food. Yeah. So typically the metric is maybe you can get 10,000 off an acre. So we've definitely exceeded that. Now, if we grew only watermelons, of course, we'd bust the data. But we grow a variety of produce, and I think we'll top that this year. We've actually expanded, as I said, into about another third of an acre. So yeah, we are growing. It's a high production farm, and we're not just growing out; we're growing up, and that's really important.
Okay.
Just like Zach said, you can grow food in a bag on your balcony.
Right.
You don't need an acre; you need a little tiny space. And there's so many ways that Raleighites can grow their own food, and that's what we want to express.
And remind us on Wednesdays we can come to the stand, which is located where?
Right at Raleigh City Farm. So we're at the corner of Franklin
There
and
you go.
Blunt, opposite William Peace University, where we also harvest softballs and other balls because their playing field is right across the way.
street.
Yeah.
You're right.
So-
You're right. And I just want a real quick point of clarification. When you say grow up, so growing out means it's taking over all the land, but growing up means you're
Right. So
like growing upwards. So what type of? I mean, how do you do that? What does that look like?
Right. So we use trellising systems,
Trellising.
right? So we have a lot of trellising. We have a beautiful arbor now where we're growing our squash, and squash is a sprawler, right? Melon is a sprawler. Tomatoes are an upward growing plant.
Love
But the trellising system allows certain plants which might sprawl to grow up and over. We have a beautiful trellis for our cherry tomatoes, so those are growing up and over. We are growing in bags. That's again, it's more of a question of soil health, but different growing techniques, again, to ensure that you don't just need to have a large piece of arable, healthy
Right.
soil. You can make your own soil, and you can grow beautiful, fresh food and feel like you're a producer and not a consumer. And that's empowering. I think that's
cool.
really important, that we are all empowered to hang out with plants more. Because we don't hang out with them enough. And I think the world would be a better place if more people spent more time with plants.
Yeah.
And real quick, that trellis term, we're talking about almost like a ladder that has fencing on it that things can grow up. Is that
Right. So trellising could be a stake in the ground, right, to grow beans, right? It could be a panel, and we have used these cattle panels that you get at the ag store, and you probably don't want that in your backyard, or if you have a large one, you could. We use T-posts to stake, so it's really a vertical structure where plants are trained to grow up. Think about espalier. You probably know the espalier is where you take a tree and you can grow a tree that wants to grow up, but you train it to grow on a flat surface. So that may be beyond the average tree care for the city of Raleigh.
Well, it's beyond me.
Yeah. So again, growing up, depending on the plant, and training plants that want to grow out, like squash, to grow up with the trellis.
Wow.
Is a technique. That
So
we use.
interesting.
It
I mean,
is cool.
again, I've said I'm not exactly a green thumb, but just almost from an engineering perspective, this idea of making use of the space and all the options we have for that. And Zach, as you were saying earlier, even if you are in an apartment and considering
Right.
the balcony, there's so much that we can do with that space. Fascinating.
So I think there's also some much talking about places you can grow, green roofs, green walls, things like that. So there
Great
are
point.
a lot of sort of engineering advancements and plant management options that put green spaces in places they haven't been able to exist before. So as we continue to grow upwards, outwards, having lots more opportunities to provide those. And again, I think about it as a connection to nature. So you don't have to climb a tree or pick a bean. You just have to sort of be around plants and in general. So that connection to nature is super important as we have less open space.
So do you see the city is using green spaces in new ways? You just talked about, the roof systems where you have plants. Are we doing any of that?
Yeah, there are multiple green roofs. The convention center downtown is a great thing where there's it's a LEED certified building, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's sustainable. So there are all kinds of different growing environments down there. They have almost like a dry, I wouldn't say desert, but sort of certain plants that function with just a little bit of rain that drains off the building. So it's fed by water that comes from the top of the building. They have a bunch of different plant communities.
Very
There are
cool.
sort of living green art, not to be confused with the AstroTurf pterodactyls that are currently downtown, but doing something simpler with plants. So the city is Walnut Creek Wetland Center is a great example of integrating stormwater plants in the design of the building. So it's becoming more and more common and more popular.
I feel like this episode is opening my eyes, and I'm going to try to keep more of an eye out for some of these green spaces. But I think the biggest takeaway that I have is actually more on this infrastructure piece. The idea that a garden is so much more than a beautiful thing or even something that produces food, as important as that is.
Right.
We're talking about all the infrastructure benefits, the sustainability tie-ins. There was an equity tie-in as we were talking about looking at where we need more of these in our spaces. And I think I'm going to be on the lookout for some of these unique ones, whether it's a rooftop or an apartment. And I'm just excited to keep an eye out for that in Raleigh. And I'm glad to know that there are folks like Zach and Lisa who are intentionally looking out for
Right.
that for us in our city.
So Zach, you had mentioned earlier about, equity in green spaces. Can you touch on that a little bit now that we have a few moments?
Sure. So we started a pilot project a couple years ago called the Street Tree Equity Project. So we have an inventory of our street trees. We overlaid those on a map. Then we combined some of those other pieces that you were looking at. So Wake County has a vulnerability index.
Okay.
And they rate census blocks by vulnerability. And it's made up of a bunch of different components. Age of people, English as a first language, asthma sufferer, so the heat island. So there's a combination. And so when we overlaid our tree map with our heat island map and then that vulnerability index, a lot of those things joined together. So the more vulnerable they were, technically there was less canopy, therefore more heat. And so that allowed us to sort of focus and prioritize. So what we've been doing is over a 3-year period, we're planting 1,000 trees in one of these areas. So it's been sort of a combination. These go out in front of somebody's house. So we'd offer up, hey, here's a door hanger that says you're eligible for a tree. You can say yes, you can say no, or you can say nothing. If you say yes or nothing, we'll bring a tree. It's planted in the right of way. The city maintains it. If you say no, we don't want to force it on you. So we'll be planting our 3rd season coming up this October. And we were lucky enough to get a $1 million grant.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yep.
Nice.
To expand our forest equity project. So this came from, we'll be starting this fall with some pruning. So that's a pruning, planting, and removal. So overall forest health centered around equity. So it needs to be done in certain federal identified areas. So census blocks, so similar to that same information we found in the canopy. So we'll be rolling that out on a bigger scale. And our goal is to continue to put trees where there aren't trees, that we can hopefully see that shift over time.
And I just want to repeat something that you shared. It's not that we are overlaying this equity and diversity piece. It existed. As you looked at the data, the areas that were considered, to use that word, vulnerable based on those different metrics, also were areas that didn't have as much tree canopy. So it's not that the city added that. That existed, and the city is being intentional about addressing it.
Correct. A lot of those pieces, the more pavement you have, typically it's going to be hotter. And so if you don't
Makes
have
sense.
trees, all those things sort of come together over time, right? So you see lots of other pieces there. One of the things Parks' goal is to have a park within, I think, a 10-minute walk of every citizen in Raleigh. So looking at those sort of larger city as a whole, it helps us be more intentional and helps us prioritize.
Yeah.
Well, this reminds me of one other question. I remember when I went shopping for a tree not too terribly long ago, and I think we ended up getting a Japanese maple, and it was really beautiful, but I was kind of taken back at how expensive trees are. Does the city have any type of program where, we can purchase trees or get trees at a lower price?
Not as of now. There are some community opportunities. There's a project called Project Pando that's run by a local company, Leaf and Limb, a tree company.
Okay.
And they're basically a for-free native tree nursery. So that's a great opportunity. What the city can provide is small trees planted in the right-of-way. So we'll work with a neighborhood. If the neighborhood says, hey, we'd like to have some more trees, we'll meet with them, go see where trees are appropriate. This is in a lot of cases, the residents will water the tree once it gets planted. So we do it as a volunteer project.
That's great.
So thinking about opportunities there. So the city funds the trees in those cases, but we're limited to city right-of-way as far as that goes.
It's cool to think that some of those trees might start from where we are. So again, for the folks who are listening and aren't watching on video, we're sitting right now at the city's greenhouse. So this is where a lot of those trees could be starting. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, we will be right back. We'll take one more quick break with the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Welcome back to the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. And it's that time. We've come to our last question of the day. And Zach, I want to start with you. What's something we haven't asked that you'd love the people of Raleigh and Raleigh's fans to know about your work or the future of urban gardens in our city?
Sure. So you can make a difference as an individual. Planting a tree or plant in your backyard can make a huge difference. One thing I would stress, though, is figure out what kind of tree that is before you plant it and look around a bit. Putting the right tree in the right place does a lot. Big trees in the wrong place cause a lot of issues. They're expensive. They're hard to manage. They can be dangerous. So right tree in the right place. We've used a lot of analogies as part of this podcast, but a tree seedling is like a Great Dane puppy in a studio apartment, right? When you start off, everything is great, but before you know it, you got a monster on your hands. So there's some great resources out there to find out more information about that specific tree that you want to plant. NC State has an amazing extension toolbox that gives you a lot of information on types of trees. We have links and information on our website about trees that we use in the city of Raleigh. So we want you to plant a tree, but we really want you to plant the right tree. The right tree for us, the right tree for you, the right tree for everybody.
And just real quickly, what's one of those big no-nos?
Large trees in close proximity to buildings, under power lines. So thinking about in Raleigh, planting a large willow oak tree under a power line, you end up with sort of the YMCA
Good point.
shaped trees. So
And for our listeners who aren't watching on video, we were just gifted with Zach doing the YMCA as he shared that.
interpretive dance.
That's really appreciate
Sing
it.
if you want.
I love it.
Best guess.
What a talented group. Wonderful. And same question for you, Lisa. What are some of the things that we haven't asked you that you'd love to share with us?
So I would encourage your listeners to lean into green.
Love it.
I've heard Sarah say she has a brown thumb. Often people say, I'm not creative. I think that's a fallacy. I think we are of green. We are of the earth. We are all biophilics. We've just been disconnected from it. So I would encourage everyone, Sarah in particular, to lean into her green. It's in her. She just hasn't given it a voice. And to do that, you simply need to hang out with plants more. You can learn about plants. You're eating plants. You're wearing plants. Plants do so many things. And again, we want at Raleigh City Farm to strengthen the people-plant connection. Our mission is to connect and nourish our community through regenerative agriculture. So I would also invite your listeners to come and visit us and engage in all the
Absolutely.
activities that we offer.
Ugh, I feel so invited, even with, I'm not going to say it anymore. I have struggled with my garden in the past, but I'm going to take on a growth mindset, to use that term in a green context, and just say, it's not something that I've learned enough about yet, but it sounds like it's something I can learn. Even though I don't know about it yet, I'd be invited to come volunteer. It sounds like with both of you.
Right. And start small. Often people have large, overly zealous plans to grow too many things.
That's a great
So
point.
I invite you to go deep, not wide.
I feel seen. Okay.
Go deep, not wide.
So
choose
for-
3 plants.
For all the brown thumbs out there is hope for you.
They are green. They just are not seeing it.
Yeah.
Somehow my wife still managed to kill all the succulents in our house.
Well, I think that it sounds like Katie and I should get together and go volunteer at Raleigh City Farm.
I think that would be a great idea because, frankly, I probably need it as well. With that, we want to thank you both, Zach and Lisa, for joining us today on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's a great time.
And in the great words of John Denver, it seems appropriate at this one. Do you guys know the only 2 things that money can't buy?
What?
That's true love and homegrown tomatoes. So, Sarah, once again, I have to thank you for a great show and making me sound much smarter than I am.
No, you-
And most importantly, thank you for our listeners, or to those of you whom are watching this podcast. Give us a follow. Find the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast on any podcast app or on YouTube. We've got more great episodes coming your way as we dive deep into the heartbeat of your Oak City. And hey, if you have any ideas for our podcast, let us know. Visit our podcast page and learn how you can share your ideas with us. We'd love to hear from you. And a special shout out to the production team behind the podcast, Earfluence, a Raleigh-based podcast production company. Learn more at earfluence.com.
They did such a great job of getting us set up here today. And actually, that makes me think we should do a shout out also.
Absolutely.
To Neil Weisenbaker, the city horticulturalist, and the whole team here at the Raleigh Greenhouse. They were so welcoming, letting us come
Amazing.
into their space. And it's been a little warm, but not too bad. Can we shout out to Raleigh Weather for allowing us to host here today?
It was definitely not as bad as I thought it was.
It was
gonna
not, right? We were able to persevere, and it's been just really enjoyable sitting here. And it's exciting to think that the plants we're seeing could be in a park here soon.
be. Absolutely. This podcast was brought to you by the City of Raleigh's Office of Strategy and Innovation, also known as the Office of Yes and the City of Raleigh's Communication Department. I'm Dan Bagley, here with producer Dr. Sarah Glova, and we'll see you next time on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast.